Frances.
Hello Jane, thank you so much for letting me be here.
Yeah, we're very glad to have you. Just a quick word about what you're wearing.
I find that if I dress as Muriel Matters, people take a lot more notice of what I'm saying and actually retain some of it. If you're in street clothing, they don't quite know. And even if I take the sash off, people just think I'm dressed as an old-fashioned. If I put the sash on, they know exactly what's going on. So I think the message from our women 100 years ago is very powerful even today.
About Muriel's early life.
Her really early life, of course, was in Adelaide, South Australia, which was a colony. We were set up in 1836, and her grandparents came out in 1854. And her grandmother was left with 4 small children, one a babe at arms when her husband died in 1857. A very remarkable and resilient woman. She managed to get the family going, and they began to buy little pieces of land around where they were living because that was where the butcher shop was. And as the little town grew, they didn't want the smell of the cattle in the abattoir. So she began a little business, Matters and Company, which still runs in South Australia today. Became a stock and station agent kind of thing. And it was her 4 sons, one being Muriel's dad, who were the lifeblood of the family. And just an amazing story of coming from nothing much really and making a life for themselves in a new country.
People don't know that there were a number of different suffrage movements. What characterised the Women's Freedom League as opposed to the Women's Social and Political Union, which Emmeline Pankhurst ran?
Everyone knows the WSPU. What they don't understand is there were lots of other suffrage groups around the countryside, and they all came together under the umbrella of the National Union of Women's Suffrage Societies, the NUWSS. And Mrs. Pankhurst decided to run the WSPU in a very autocratic sort of way, and a lot of the women in that group felt that they should have the democracy that they were striving for elsewhere in their own group. So there was a breakaway in 1907, and they formed a group called the Women's Freedom League through the good works of people like Teresa Billington-Greig and Edith Howe Martin and Mrs. Despard, Charlotte Despard, and their colours were green, gold and white. So the colours of the Union of Suffrage Societies was red, white and purple, so there's a whole language of colours around those groups. The thing that differentiated them, of course, is the WSPU became violently militant, whereas the WFL wanted to be militant but not violent and win people over with logical debate. And the other interesting thing I think is that the Women's Freedom League continued after women got the vote in a limited way and didn't actually disband till the late 60s, middle 60s.
Profile things that Muriel, I know, was involved in were things like the caravan tour, the grill incident and the balloon flight. Could you mention something
Certainly.
about that?
Well, I mean, I think it's the caravan tour that brought her to Hastings and started that love of this place.
So very blame her.
Well, exactly. I'm sort of modern day Muriel. So she started the caravan tour in May of 1908 and was here in July, but must have come here earlier as well. And I know she and her husband owned property on Beach Road in front of St Mary in the Castle, and then bought property in St Mary in the Castle. So she spent 6 months touring around the countryside of southeast England and Wales, drumming up support for the Women's Freedom League and the cause of votes for women. And of course the big demonstration in London was June 1908, and I felt sure she would have been there, but it appears she was still tripping around the countryside. When she came back from that, a lot of the groups decided to have a night of action at Westminster, 28th of October, and she was part of the Women's Freedom League, which was smuggling the chains into the ladies' gallery and then chaining themselves to the grill just around tea time so that when the members came back, debating a licensing bill, Muriel, with years of elocution and acting behind her, just filled her lungs and said, "The women of England demand the vote," and kept talking. And they raced up to get rid of her, but of course she was chained to the grill. So they had to undo the screws on the grill, which of course put her on the floor of the house. So that's why she became the first woman to speak in Westminster. For that, she went to prison for 30 days. She wasn't arrested inside the House, but when she left the House, they arrested her outside by Richard Lionheart's statue. Trooped off to Holloway, thinking it would be great fun, but of course they started to treat the women rather harshly, so she never went back to prison. But lots of other brave women did, and actually underwent forced feeding. So after she got out of prison, she decided to write to the King and ask for suffrage to be placed on the agenda of Parliament. And because he didn't respond, she and the Women's Freedom League hired the 80-foot dirigible and floated over London with that marvellous votes for women on the side and dropping brochures from the sky. But of course the wind was terrible and she didn't actually get close to Westminster. But that was how she made those 3 firsts and made her name as a daring and outrageous person, but was also a really gifted orator and in great demand all over England, Scotland, Wales and Ireland. So very busy.
I was far too busy making a trail of leaflets across London. But sad to say, we were blown off our course. We missed the Houses of Parliament, and we landed at Coulsdon in Surrey in the top branches of a tree.
So as well as campaigning for women's suffrage, Muriel was obviously involved, you touched on earlier that the work carried on past achieving the vote. She was working with poor children and mothers in East London. Can you tell us anything about
Very
that?
much. During the war, she tried to go over to the conference in The Hague and ended up studying Montessori teaching with Muriel Montessori in Spain, which is where she'd been exiled to. And so with Sylvia Pankhurst, Sylvia had always wanted to have this Mother's Arms in Bow Street to be able to give the poorest children the best possible education. So Muriel came back and taught those children in that place, and we have photos of her class in the books that Sylvia Pankhurst has produced herself. And that special link with Sylvia Pankhurst is acknowledged through Helen Pankhurst now, who's really adopted the Muriel Matters Society and gives us great encouragement to keep doing our work. But it wasn't just about that. When she ran here in Hastings in 1924, her platform was around social housing. Very interested in making sure that everyone had food, abolition of sweatshops, prison reform from her time in Holloway, all those sorts of things. She even at one stage demonstrated electrical appliances because she wanted women to know that this help was available for them in the home.
Wow.
And just as there was with computers in our time, we were all a bit sceptical that they would do half the things that they said. People were very sceptical about electricity and washing machines. Dare I say, no one wanted a washing machine. I mean, can you imagine when you look back at how the washing was done, or not done, you had to send it out.
Yeah.
So she was very involved in all sorts of things that we know in her later life, wrote letters to the editor almost on a daily basis.
And you touched on her role in First World War.
Yes.
Clearly not an advocate of...
No,
what
and
was going
perhaps
on.
that's one of the reasons she fell through the cracks of history. If you were a conscientious objector or against the war, people weren't terribly happy with you. But she did spend her time trying to be involved with the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. And that may be one of the reasons she married her husband at that time, because he had American citizenship. And we know the British didn't want British women going to those conferences because they were part of the war. And her brother died in Gallipoli, so we know that devastated the family for quite some time. So, you know, along with her friend Violet Tillard, who was a Quaker, they were absolutely, totally against the war. And I think something that we need to talk about, world peace, that concept, rather than laughing about it as we do in miscongeniality movies, we should talk about it as a really important way of making our life into the future more secure.
We're in Hastings today. What do you think the town meant to Muriel?
Well, I think she obviously loved it, and we know from reminiscences from her niece, who's still alive, that Muriel skinny dipped.
Oh.
Yes, I know.
In those days?
Loved strawberries. I think she got up very early in the morning to do it. And she had a cat, and we know she loved Pelham Crescent. and we know she loved walking down to the library and reading the paper. And that's why it's so very hard to understand why there's nothing much left of her here now, because she was a very social person, wrote letters. We're very keen to try and find a person or anyone connected to a lady called Willow, who had a school at Lissenden, those sorts of things, or a shoebox buried in someone's home. And I don't
We are very interested in other women as well, sitting there over the last 100 years. We're obviously particularly interested in you and your role. Can you tell us how you succeeded in your career and how difficult it's been being an MP in Australia?
Well, I guess I came to politics in a rather ordinary way. When my children were enrolled in kindy, I just got onto the kindy committee. So in lots of ways, it's not the traditional way now to get into Parliament, and more's the pity. But I then started to pester the local Member of Parliament for grants for our kindy, and in the end he gave me a job to keep me quiet, I think. But I ran in the state election at a time when I wasn't thought of as a winning candidate, and there's a lot of misconception about supporting good candidates in every seat whenever you can, particularly local people with lots of connections. So I managed to get a very big swing and get into Parliament. I was told they'd let me run, but you won't win. And of course I did.
That's a challenge.
20 years later, I'm sort of still there. So within the party system, there are all sorts of good reasons to be in a political party, of course. And I think the two-party system delivers great stability and security for people. But I now have some very deep-seated concerns about how parties run and how they select their candidates, which led me to run as an independent at the last election in my constituency. And fortunately, or for whatever reason, I'm still here.
Excellent.
In my 21st year in Parliament.
Wow, that's definitely an achievement. So the meeting today is about strategic partnerships, and do you have any words of advice or wisdom for us as a partnership about the best ones, what makes them tick, and how we...
Well, I think partnerships are really important. You can't do very much on your own. You might start on your own, but you really do need to find people to support you. And like-minded people make the whole struggle much more fun. So I think strategic partnerships are really important in not only supporting each other, but finding the best ways. Often ideas are workshopped, for want of a better word, and you come up with something perhaps a little bit better than you thought about, which is a bit anti-Pankhurst when you think about it, because she just thought her idea was the best altogether. But I think the thing that Muriel and her friends found was working together was great fun, and that many hands do make light work. So when you can find things that you're interested in and can work on together, I'm sure it makes for a much better outcome.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank
Really
you so
appreciate
much
it.
for having me.
Thank you.
We'll do the
Let's
handshake.
something.